We welcome you to Greg and the WKU Joint GT Network, and so excited you could be with us today. I know some of you realize this is a follow-up to a conversation we had this spring, and Julie Gann was with us from Fayette County Public Schools, and you were very interested in learning more information from Julie. And when since then we have talked, and Julie's even moved on, and she's even added more things to their program, and so she has even new information to share. And joining Julie today will be Skip Clevenger, and Skip, as all of you know, is one of our consultants with Greg, and he works with English learners, and he also works with Greg Ed, and he's a school psychologist and has just a wealth of knowledge to bring to the table. Kelly Davis is also here with us from Greg, and she has training. She's a school psychologist too, so we've got so much to bring to the table to add to this conversation that we started in the spring. And so, in order, some of you weren't there in the spring and you don't have that context. So, when Julie starts today, she's going to back up just a bit and talk about what the policies and the procedures that they put in place in regard to special considerations. So, they have so much planned for you today. I'm going to stop talking and let them get started. So Julie, go ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jamie. Again, my name is Julie Gann, and I am serving my third year as a Gifted and Talented Coordinator for Fayette County Public Schools. And I'm glad to be here today. I love Skip, and do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Unmute. Sorry. Yeah, good morning, everybody. Just so glad to be here, and Jamie did a great job introducing me. I'm just really pleased to speak to you guys. And GT is not something I know a great deal about, and so it's been the last 3 or 4 weeks of preparing for this has been really eye-opening for me. It's been great. I've learned a lot.
So let me just talk a little bit about the norms before we jump in, because you're always welcome to ask questions in the chat as we're moving along, and we'll monitor the chat. And so, and I know that Julie and Skip too will let you know when it's time to respond to questions and things like that. But this is for you. It's your network meeting. We do have information to give out, but it is for you. So we want you to have a few minutes to digest this information and ponder, and then ask some questions. And then we're going to close with this session with you having time to think about this and how you might use some of these resources. And at the end, we're going to have a little survey for you to do, and then you fill out the little survey and you'll get your ELA certificate. That'll be very important. So we're not going to do the attendance first. We're going to do it last toward the end of the meeting. But thank you so much. So Julie, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Jamie. Okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen. And everyone should be able to see that. Everybody see that okay? Good? Okay, good. So again, my name is Julie Gann, and I am the coordinator of the Gifted and Talented Education here in Fayette County. My Gifted and Talented Education began back in the mid-90s in Florida. And Florida's regulation obviously is, every state's regulation is different from state to state. And so my first experience began in inner city, West Palm Beach. So this is where a lot of even the things that we've brought here into Kentucky, when we started thinking about this over 5 years ago and trying to put the wheels in motion to this process, many of the things that were being utilized with inner city students in West Palm Beach were brought to the table there. So I'm going to talk about our journey in Fayette County, and it's been a journey. It's been, like I said, over 5 years of planning, prepping, tweaking along the way. This process that we have instilled in Fayette County was vetted, and the whole process with WKU, we were asking their insight, their interest in how we could fine tune and refine this process. We started our process, like I said, over 5 years ago with a team of teachers from different types of schools. I think it's very important when you start thinking about how you're going to create your procedures, having different people and different voices at the table. And that's what we did. We had 5 teachers from very diverse school settings, from low income to more mid-range to even high-income schools that we have in our district. We have a very diverse district in Fayette County. And so it just brought different people to the table as we refined the process. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm very informal. So at the end, I'll leave questions. But again, if you have any questions for the chat, go ahead. I won't be monitoring them as I'm going through, but I can definitely stop at the end and go through that. So again, you all know, we in special considerations in the state of Kentucky, we have part of our gifted regulation. We have a section for special considerations, and that is the environmental, cultural, and disabling conditions which may mask a child's true abilities and lead to exclusion of otherwise eligible students who possess demonstrated or potential ability to perform at an exceptionally high level will be taken into consideration. And we talked a lot about in Fayette County being demonstrated or even the potential, because again, potential is going to be subjective, but just, having those conversations, the dialogue at the table is very important. So of course, there's 3 measures that are able for students to fall into the special considerations, which is being listed as an exceptional child, disadvantaged, or underachieving. So the first thing that we had to do was to have a policy. And if your district does not have a policy, you need to make sure you have a policy set in place for this, and then procedures to follow. So we designed equitable procedures for screening, which of course is what must start to begin with, and then the identification to meet our students that we're traditionally underrepresented. So the racial ethnic subgroups, because again, I know we're all seeking to find our underserved populations. Exceptional students are with disabilities, disadvantaged, underachieving, and then the EL. So that was how we separated that into our procedures in Fayette County. And then we have our policy, a Fayette County policy at 08132, which again focuses on the environmental cultural factors that may contribute to a student being overlooked and being identified as a gifted and talented student. So students not eligible under the regulatory evidence requirements shall begin the process. And again, this is part of our regulation. So we want to ensure that all students have this opportunity. And that's the key. The key here is ensuring opportunity and access. I speak about it a lot here at different tables with teachers, even with parents, and we have equity council committee members as well in our district. And it's all about the opportunity and access. If students have the opportunity, they have access to it, then we are able to try to eliminate those barriers that some students have with identification. So what we've really done in Fayette County, and even since I've met with you, I guess it was back in February, was we really fine-tuned it even more. Again, we are very reflective in Fayette County, and so as we went through this year, we've really narrowed it down to 5 steps. And so something that's very doable. It's more of a deep dive, and I think it's not that, I don't want to say it's more, again, it's like a differentiated thing. When you want to look at that deep dive of that student, at the data dive of the student, you're really going to look at the student as a whole child and look at the different factors. And so what we do, we have 5 steps. And the first step that we focus on is we have what we call GRCs, and they're gifted recommendation committees or review committees that we have at every school in our district. We have 69 schools, so every school has a committee. The committee members may change depending on obviously the areas of identification, but they were going to convene to review factors that may inhibit a gifted and talented identification, including the cultural, language, economic, environmental, and health. And what we've done in Fayette County is we've created like an impact factor form. And again, with being a large district like ourselves, we have to have consistencies in place, which I'm sure you all are ensuring that as well. So students, if they fall under one of these categories, then they have an impact that may fall into their areas of identification. So what is impacting the student's performance or ability? So we have an impact factor form, again, like I said, and so at the very top of our form, the conversations happening at the table with the appropriate personnel, and they're going to determine if the student is either twice exceptional, disadvantaged, or underachieving. And so with these conversations, we know that this is what's going to lead us down the path of this possible special consideration and possible gift identification. And then within, again, like I just shared with, after those 3 things are just discussed and determined, and we're also looking at the 5 categories. And so we have indicators under each of these. So we look at the cultural, indicators. We look at language. So if they're ELL student, how long have they been in the country? Have they been RFP'd? I mean, just all the different conversations that we have there. Are they acclimating to the language? Economic factors, are they disadvantaged? In that capacity, environmental, and then health. So, environmental could be situations like, a death in the family, and then obviously health. So there's just some different factors that may inhibit a student's performance in the classroom. So that's step one. And so it's just, again, trying to figure out where we're going to fall and where the student lies in what's impacting their performance for possible identification. So then step two happens, and at that same committee meeting, that review of that deeper dive of the data is performed. So we're going to look at that committee meeting, the performance assessments. So any summative, formative assessments they're having in the classroom, state level assessments, how are they performing on a daily basis, those types of things. And then we also go into, we utilize the Iowa assessment in Fayette County, as well as the COGAT. And with both of these tests, it's amazing when you do it online. And we've gone from the paper pencil version now to the online version. There are so many different options that you're able to utilize when using the online platforms, including local norms. When you set up the test, and we learned this in Fayette County, if you have to set that up prior to the event happening. So make sure that when you do your local norms, if you want that to happen, you can have local norms done so you don't have to do the hand or the manually put that in for your district or for your schools. We can also get low SES scores. So for students that are low socioeconomic status, they compare those students to other students that are in that same category. And that has been incredibly informative for us in the school district, looking at those low SES norms on the Iowa. And so it's been a great tool. And then we also look at subset scores. Like, for example, like when we're looking at the COGAT, we will look at a nonverbal quantitative for our EL students. Take out that verbal component and compare compare those scores. It would not be a composite score, but it's a partial composite. So there's so many different things that are available with the online platform of both the Iowa and the COGAT. And it's also another point too, also does help you with educating. I feel like in our district, educating the appropriate personnel at the table at the GRCs, you're educating the teachers, the administration, the guidance counselors, and so forth at the table on this data. So, we start with the data, and just, to get an idea of where our students are falling. If they're, they're falling in the 7th, stay 9, 8th, stay 9, scores, where are they at? And then we go into a further dive of some norm referenced scales. And so we have been utilizing, and this is where we've really been fine tuning. We began using the GATES, and I'm going to go into this a little bit later today. The GATES is a gifted and talent evaluation scale. It's a norm reference scale. It's great. It follows right along with our gifted regulation here in Kentucky. With it, they have a general intellectual ability area, and academic creativity, leadership, and artistic skills. So it falls right in line with what we need. It's overarching for academic, and that's what we found is it's a great tool to start with. So that's one of the tools that we have been using here in Fayette County. Another one that we have been just started using, which we are really finding helpful to us as we have our committee meetings, is the SIGs, and that's the school. Oh, I just forgot the words. It's a school scales for identifying gifted students. The difference in the SIGs versus the GATES. The SIGs has each academic area. So you have the language arts, the math, the science, and the social studies. So that has helped us to even refine, to get additional information on our students that are seeking identification in an academic area that did not have that stay 9 score, and that have an impact factor for them, right? Have an impact factor for possible gift identification. Another one we utilize significantly is the HOPE scale. And that's an overarching scale for students. And we'll again talk about that more as well. It's a great scale that we've found that's been quite helpful. And the last is the CLED. And So those three at the top, we have to purchase. I'm going to give you links to those as well later today. The CLED is free and online. The CLED is a teacher rating scale for high potentially culturally, linguistically, and economically diverse learners. It's 2 scales. We'll go into it more into it a little bit. But it's separated by cultural and economic. So it's 2 parts. It's a great, or linguistically and economic. It's two parts. It's a great tool to utilize. And each of the characteristics are research based. So again, so we've gone through, you've looked at data, looked at the impact, looked at data, we've looked at the scales. So now we have all this evidence. And so the committee is creating all this evidence. And so at this point, the school committee is ready to present it to our district committee. So when we do our district programs, identifications, as well as district special considerations, we combine school committees with the district committee to make these decisions. So with the gifted and talented resource teacher, we have one we're very fortunate. We have one at every one of our schools. Some of them do have multiple schools that they serve, but every elementary school does have a gifted and talented resource teacher. And then our resource teacher are also assigned at the middle and high school as well. And they collect and present all of the evidences that have been collected at the school level to the district committee. District committee is myself, my colleague Peggy Cullen, who's another instructional specialist, and then we also have a director as well. So our committee reviews with the appropriate personnel from the school level. Many times, the gifted talented resource teacher will bring an admin along with them when they come in, and we review all the evidences in collaboration with that. So, many times now what's nice about all this too is, we have Zoom, so you're easily to schedule all these meetings. And then when you're at this committee meeting, these are the things that we would be reviewing. And we have a form, again, because of consistency and having such a large district in Fayette County, we have a form it's a collection of evidence form initially, very similar to probably what you use for your gifted and talented identification, because you are collecting this similar evidences prior to, but these are just going to be the additional things that you may bring to the committee. So we always look at, is there a teacher or parent, is there a self-referral, that impact factor we talked about, that sociogram, so a sociogram for underserved students from Dr. Karen Rogers is a good one to reference when collecting your evidences. Any observations, lessons, anecdotal evidences from the school level, from the classroom teacher, from the gifted and talented teacher, whoever's been working, the appropriate personnel who's been working with that student. Again, like I talked about, the CLED, the SIGs. Another great tool that I'm not going to go into a great deal, but it's the acculturation quick screen by Dr. Catherine Collier. That's a tool that we don't use as frequently as probably we need to or like to due to, but this is really a situation where if a student comes in and how quickly they are grasping the language here in our country. And so it's a great tool that the EL teacher would be the appropriate personnel to be part of that conversation. We use the GATES, the HOPE as well. And then we review all those assessments like we talked about, those local norms, the low SES scores, composite scores, subset scores. We utilize MAP, our district, COGAP, Iowa, and any other additional assessments that we have. We just, again, that deep dive of the student. And then the last step is the step 5. And the DRC can decide, it's basically very cyclical, where you can either, we look at the evidences, we're all together, and we say, okay, yes, we have enough evidences here to say, yes, this child's gifted and talented. And we go ahead and do that formal identification. There are times when we say, oh, we might need to do an alternative assessment. Skip and I were talking about the Los Gromos, which is a Spanish version of the COGAT. That might be something that we discuss at this conversation. Or do we want to give it an alternate achievement test? Do we want to do an alternate cognitive test, like a Kaufman? Just some different things that we will look at there to discuss what's best for the student and the best interest of the student. Another option can be where they just say, we're going to continue to monitor the student and just watch the student's progress in that specified area. and just continue to monitor. That could be over months. I mean, this is not something that it's going to be a quick turnaround. Many times we just, it's collecting that evidence, watching the student grow. Many times due to the lack of exposure, we were just coming out of a pandemic where our students are, we see, at least in Fayette County, how the achievement scores were not as high as they have been in years past. So, what do we want to continue to monitor these students as they go from fourth grade to fifth grade and so forth. Or they can say, you know what, at this time, we're not going to look for gift and talent identification. So that's very rare, obviously, but typically it's really one of the top three that we focus in on with our special considerations. So, again, just going back to opportunity and access, in the GT Department of Fayette County Public Schools, we believe that when equitable procedures focused on the whole child are implemented, students have the opportunity and access to reveal their full potential. And that's really why we're all here. But I know we all are here for that reason. We want to find our students and reveal what they have for us. So at this time, I can go ahead and take questions on this section. I don't know if there's any questions in the chat.
Hi, this is Renee Lackey, and I have a couple of questions. Well, my first one is it possible to get a copy of that PowerPoint? I was trying to take notes frantically, but didn't get all the names of everything. So that was my first question.
Yes, Julie has already shared with us, and so we'll be sending that out.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. My other question is, I work in a small independent school district where we struggle with local norms because we do not have enough students in certain categories to effectively get a local norm in our school district, if that makes sense, especially in the cultural areas. And so any recommendations for that? I mean, we have, kind of just compared among our group, but I think on most assessments, you have to have, I think, at least 100 children fall into a category. And so we don't have that. We do in socioeconomic area, but not in your cultural areas. So any recommendations there?
Well, I know, and when we are doing, and we have schools that have less than 100, so we are, it's hard to use local norms when you have to find another school that's similar in the demographics. I understand that. My recommendation would be if you could just if you can take your 100 students that you have in several school buildings to find your local norms, that'd be probably the best thing, instead of trying to focus and divide it into cultural. Just take the students as whole. Skip, you can go ahead and speak to that.
Yeah, I was going to chime in. That's perfect. Yeah, you want your local norms to be diverse, like to include all groups. It wouldn't be a set of norms for, culturally and linguistically diverse and set of norms for each category. Yeah.
For example, in our, where we see a lot of gaps is in African-American male population. And so if you're comparing in any given grade in our district, we don't have enough local norms, or we don't have enough students that fall in that category to get a local norm for that.
Yeah, I guess, my recommendation is just like Julie's. It would be, you want your local norms to be ideally for a screening process, and you're screening all kids, and you're developing norms for all kids. So, African Americans and Black students would be kind of, within that local norm, as would kids who don't speak English, as would kids who are economically disadvantaged, and they would be in there with white kids and kids who are not economically disadvantaged. It would be a real diverse local norm group.
So when you make the local norm that diverse, those students do not fall in the gifted range. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think what you're looking for is a trend in scores that's locally based, so there's going to be variation, when you compare a particular child to those local norms, but the local norms tend to be much more accurate in terms of reflecting kind of the realities within your district.
Like I said,
Okay,
too,
so Julie, when in your district, comparing to state guidelines on gifted identification and the 96th percentile required score. So for these students, what do you consider as falling in the gifted range?
so, well, but we don't have a cut score, and that's the whole point of special consideration, and that's why we utilize these other scales. Because what you're seeing is that the score is not reflective either. It could be they have the potential, they have the exposure's not there, all these different factors go into play to impact their performance. So that's why we utilize these different scales, which we found have been very helpful, along with other evidences collected for that. And like I said, because not always do the local norms, like you said, they're not going to come in that gifted range. It's because it's a local norm of that group of students, and it's going to change every year that group takes tests. So,
So these scales are more looking for gifted behaviors.
yes, they're all characteristics of, yes, absolutely.
Gotcha.
And
Gotcha.
I'll go into those our next section of.
Okay.
And these are just the ones
Awesome.
we've found that have worked best for us. I mean, it's just, again, and like I said, we started with really just utilizing the gates up until just a few months ago. And we're like, we need something different because we needed something different for the academic areas. Because on the gates, it's a great tool, but it has academic as one component rather than the STIGs that has it for each area, which helps us just with conversation and dialogue, and again, doing that deeper dive on the student and learning about the whole child.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm so sorry I was muted. I'm so glad you probed and went deep with your question. That's exactly what we want to happen today. We want you to have some time to digest this and pose questions and then get the network's reaction. So do any other folks have questions that they want to talk about at this time? Okay, Julie.
Okay.
And if something comes up, I will be monitoring the chat, and we'll have other opportunities for questions. But
Yeah.
sometimes it's good because just as Julie was able to say, oh, that's what we're going to do next, it's just a great transition to what she's going to talk about. Thank you.
We were so prepared. We had no idea. Okay, so I'll go ahead, and the next section is on our the tools that we use. So let's see. Yes, so here are everybody can see this, okay? I'm assuming. The tools to provide evidences of giftedness. And so this is where I'm going to focus on the 4 that we use the most. And I can speak to because we have used this for the past. Well, we've only been doing special considerations like this process in Fayette County since December of 2019. We had a procedure. In our district, we have standard operating procedures for us, and so they have to be approved by the district leadership committee, which is the cabinet, the superintendent's cabinet, and they approved our procedures. And so we started this in December. We got approved in December 2019. We all know what happened. So we started really in January, and then we had school closure, and we were very, very concerned on would this be able to sustain being in our school closure, being virtual, remote. And I'm happy to say we do. We have over 100 students right now in the process of. So it's been a great tool keeping track of these students, keeping track of our students that have gone through the process, the identifications. This is something we want to report back to our leadership team as well. So these are the 4 that we use, like I said, most frequently, and we have found has given us great dialogue and backs the performance. When we look at, like many times we'll look at a student's performance on an Iowa assessment and then look at the MAP scores, and it may not be together, but then we look at the SIGs or the GATE, and one of these scales are supporting the data that we're seeing on these other tests. So it's just, and again, another piece of evidence to help you all to make decisions on our students that have barriers. So the HOPE, the GATES, the SIGs, and the CLED. So what I've done is, like I said, I have linked them all to the very end of this PowerPoint so you can easily get these. The first three, like I said, you have to purchase, and the last one is free online. So the Hope Teacher Rating Scale, obviously, it's Marcia Gentry, Scott Peters, Neil Sampiera, John McIntosh, and Matthew Fugate are all the authors of the Hope Rating Scale. So I'm going to kind of give you a background of this and move forward there. I know that Marcia Gentry came to Fayette County. I don't know if any of y'all came and saw her. It was several years ago. I think it might have been one of the times when we first started beginning our process of trying to figure out how we're going to implement procedures for the special considerations. But the Hope Scale can be used to identify students from all income and ethnic groups, but was carefully designed to be more equitable to identify students from low-income families. And this scale came from Project Hope, and it's, having opportunities promotes excellence. What is really, I find that we have started to utilize in Fayette County is using this as a universal assessment for all students as a screener, like what you can do in a certain grade level at schools, but may have a higher, may a low income, or have a low number of students that identify gifted. That's we're finding. We have had schools that wasn't reflecting what the amount of percentage of students should be gifted in their school. They have very low numbers. So using this as a universal assessment for all students is one of the recommendations actually utilized by the Hope rating scale. It was created at Purdue University, designed to aid in the identification of gifted and talented students. So what I've done some screenshots so you can see what it looks like, and we'll go into this each one in depth here. So the Hope scale includes two subscales, is an academic and a social that take into account the multifaceted dimensions of giftedness. And then items on each of these subscales were developed to be as income and culturally neutral as possible. So you can see there all the information that you would complete. It's focusing on, are they English language learner? Are they female or male? And then the ethnic groups there. And then when rating on each item below, think about how the student is compared to other children that are similar in age, experience, and environment. And that's really important. I've found this with all the scales. They have, with our teachers from certain schools, from different experiences, it's very important that they are rating these students that are compared to the students that are in that school building. And the experiences that these students have had or not had in their growing up. So these are the questions that focus on the academic portion that you'd be looking at. And again, it's very overarching to me when we're utilizing these. Item 1 is performs or shows potential for performing at remarkable high levels, is eager to explore new concepts, exhibits intellectual intensity, uses alternative processes, thinks outside the box, and has intense interest. So, things that many of our gifted students or our high achieving students would show these on that academic subscale. And then on the social subscale, because it's obviously as important as the academic, thinking about these characteristics of these students. Are they sensitive to larger, deeper issues of human concern? Self-aware, shows compassion for others, is a leader within his or her group of peers, effectively interacts with adults or other students. So you can see both are important when looking at this scale. So again, like I mentioned earlier, it's really important that they rate each of the students as compared to other children similar in age, background, experience, culture, environment. Like I said, many teachers, if they have had a high performing class or taught only in a gifted classroom, you have to compare it to an average 4th grader or average 6th grader that comes to the classroom in that same experience. It is recommended not using any cutoff score on the subscales because it's an aid to the process. Do the multiple pathways of identifying giftedness. And I think that's really important. There's not a score. I know a lot of times teachers want to know, or you may want to know what's that number, and there's not one. So it's just it's a piece of evidence used in that dialogue when deciding upon identification. It's supposed to be used as a single document in a portfolio. Again, we collect so much information on our students to make the best decision of their educational experience. So it's a single document to make that informed decision. And it did say this, and I thought about this even with our talent pool, because we always talk about this in talent pool too, it's this talking about scores, but it uses scores for inclusion rather than exclusion. This is a conversation of, many teachers may have a misconception or have, misconception on gifted education. They could be a behavior problem, like this child can't be gifted because of this, this, and this. So, again, educating people and the appropriate personnel at the table is key when having these conversations. Do you want me to, maybe you should stop it in between each one? Is that what's best, or do you want me to go through all 4? So, I can go through, I'll go through all 4 and then we can.
Julie, can I ask you a quick question?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay, can the HOPE, because I'm the GT resource for middle and high school, can HOPE be used at all grade levels?
Yes, it's a,
Okay.
I believe it's a, most of they're 5, I think it's 5 to 18. Oh, no,
5 to 18.
no, there's K, the HOPE is K to 12. HOPE is
K to 12, okay, all right. Thank
Okay, so the next one that we, like I said, this is really one of the first, the HOPE and the GATES are the first 2 scales that we really began to implement here in Fayette County. And the GATES 2 is 2nd edition. The GATES has been around a long time. I had found when I first came in to our district, we found old scales. So that this is the GATES 2 that we are using right now. It's a norm reference instrument, which is great when you get a raw score to a scaled score to a percentile. And it identifies students grades or ages 5 to 18 are gifted and talented. There are 5 scales like I spoke of earlier, and then each of these scales or as sections consist of 10 items. So it's just 10 characteristics of, and then these scales and items are aligned with federal and state definitions of gifted and talented students. So you basically have 50 clearly defined items divided into 5 scales that describe specific observable and measurable behaviors. So great tool to utilize as well. So this is a good screenshot of what the GATES the summary form looks like. Again, there's the 5 areas. And then what we have done here, and we do this in Fayette County, you see that there's that raw score, which again, you just norm it to the percentile, to the standard score. And then you get a standard error measure of 3 points. And then you get the probability ranking for gifted and talented. So we're always looking, and you can see too at the very bottom of that interpretation guide, that the GI and the academic are on the left, and the creativity, leadership, and artistic are on the right. So when we go through this, we're really looking to see, are these students going to be highly probable or extremely probable as being a gifted and talented student? We look at probable, but we really are trying to focus when we have our conversations. Are they in that standard score range of that 111 to 121 or above on that standard score, including that standard error measure as well? And so that's just some conversations that we have here as, again, a piece of evidence that can or could not be used for a possible identification. And it's very simple to do. And when you, another thing you do, when you do norm the GATES, it's different norms for males and females. So what I want to do here is just kind of give you descriptions of the scales that were there for us to see. Again, it's great about it for us here in Kentucky is it really falls in line with our areas of identification, the general intellectual ability. And you can see some indicators there, makes quick and valid generalizations, demonstrates ability to retain and manipulate large amounts of information. So, again, things that we're very familiar with here. Academic skills, like I said, that demonstrates considerable knowledge of a specific academic area. The reading, how they read, what grade level they're reading at, comprehension. There are some questions in the academic about math, computation, and so forth. So again, I think for an overarching piece of evidence for academic, it's a great tool. But when you want to go deeper, I would suggest the SIGs that we're going to talk about here in a second. And again, we just have refined our processes here with that as well. Creativity, and this is an area in Fayette County where we struggle with identifying students in creativity. And so we're really starting to utilize these scales to help us with collecting these portfolio of evidences for our students in creativity. So that's there as well, produces original or unusual projects or products, challenges existing ideas or products. Leadership, again, those characteristics that you've seen before, behavior checklists and so forth. Cooperative attitude, actively participates, is a leader among his or her peers. And then last, artistic. And what we have our teachers or our committees, I should say, do these scales. We make sure we tell them that we want them, they say, well, we're looking for general intellectual only, we're looking for academic, but we ask them to do all the scales because number one, because a lot of times we'll find students that have the highly probable of being gifted as a leader that was not on anyone's radar before. So we found that, we encourage our committees to complete these scales in its entirety. I know that, it's 50 questions. Yes, it takes time, but it's incredibly important because now what this can happen is a student that we were just going to be identifying or possibly identifying for a math identification may also now be on the watch list for leadership or artistic ability. And now we need to go through an audition process. So it's just, again, it's more conversations that can come from these scales. So the use of the gates, obviously, is to help identify students who are gifted and talented. Another a possible use of it is to document progress as a consequence of special intervention programs, and then serve as a research tool. So again, it's multifaceted. It talks about in the manual, that obviously the examiner, which would be one of you, that would be obviously norming this scale, as a gifted and talented specialist or trained professional educational diagnostician or a school psychologist. The instrument, though, can be completed by teachers or parents and returned to the examiner. So, or even the rater themselves and returned to the examiner. And then it's individually administered. There's a 9-point Likert scale. There's a total raw scales computed for each of the 5 scales, and then each raw score is converted to a standard score and then a percentile rank. And many times what we have done in Fayette County too with this as well at the committee meetings is that they together could complete, or they will, we'll have separate people doing it separately and then bringing it to the table of how they rated the student. So if I thought that the student, had a 9 on, on 1, and then you thought the student should have a 7, we have conversations of why it's one way or the other, or how we had these conversations, or how we came to that conclusion on the characteristics of. All right, so the next one that we have been utilizing in Fayette County scale is the SIGS, and that is the scales for identifying gifted students by Gail Reiser, and Kathleen McConnell. They're the authors of this. Again, these are for scales for identifying students ages 5 to 18. Now, what's great about this scale, there are 2. There's the school scale, and then there's a home rating scale. And then in the manual, we found they have in English and Spanish. So that's quite helpful for students that you have students that you wouldn't have to get anything. It's already translated for you for some of our Spanish-speaking families for that home rating scale. Again, the purpose of the SIGS is to assist the identification, to monitor, and then again to use in research studies. So this is a picture of what the SIGS looks like, and like I referenced before, we have found art is not part of the SIGS, so that's the one thing that the GATES helps if you're looking for artistic talent. And the SIGS, though, does separate into the academic areas that we use for identification here in Kentucky. So you have the GI, general intellectual ability, you have the language arts, mathematics, science, social studies, and creativity and leadership. So you can see there again, you have the areas that you're going to be rating, and then that raw score that is used to a standard score, and then the percentile. Now, norms used, there's general and gifted, and so you have different norms that you can use there. Again, I think it goes back to the purpose of what you're trying to use this information for. And then again, the directions are there. And again, it's very important that the rater is comparing it to his or her, the peers that would be average to that classroom or that school building. And I really feel like that's probably that's been the hardest part of our teachers completing these scales, is when we want them to think about the students in their building and comparing it to that population. So the SIGs, so the rater selection is the SIGs school rating scales designed to complete, again, completed by a teacher, a counselor, or other professional. And they observe whoever does complete this, that they did not complete unless they've been working with that student at minimum of 6 weeks. And we reference 6 weeks a lot, even with our different procedures here in Fayette County for evidence collection and so forth. So, minimum of 6 weeks is a good tool, or a minimum to use timeline for that. The home rating scale is to be completed by the guardian or caregiver, parent or caregiver. Again, an individually administered raw scores convert to that scale score, and then a percentile rank. And then this is the last scale. Like I said, this is, you type in the high potential culturally, linguistically, and economically diverse learner. It's a mouthful. Teacher rating scale, and it's there online. It's a PDF that's available. Like I said, there's 2 parts. The top is linguistically diverse, and then the bottom is the economically. So again, we've had situations where they may be doing both of the scales, or both of these teacher rating scales. Sometimes they just land on one or the other. But it's, again, incredibly useful information. And each of these student demonstrates, I'm going to go through these in a minute, have research to back them. So it's included in the table of references to research to support the questions posed. So it's great. And I gave the link for it here for you. So to demonstrate for the culturally linguistically, you have the student will demonstrate a strong sense of pride in his or her cultural background, a desire to teach peers words from his or her native language, eagerness to translate for peers and adults, a balance between appropriate behaviors expected of his native culture and the new culture. I'll go through here, above average English language proficiency growth. Again, that acculturation may have happened more quickly than an average student coming and learning a new language. Eased in adapting to new environments. So, these are just some things here that are utilized there in that checklist, or that rating scale, I should say. And then on the economic side, the bottom part of that checklist, you have the effective communication through expressive speech and imagery, a high degree of emotional responsiveness, an independent nature, a keen sense of justice, questioning orientations, and just some things there that you would see. And again, the conversation and dialogue when our committees are completing these scale, I think have been so remarkable, because you just hear the conversations about the student and why they say one thing or the other. And again, the committee learns more about the student just from the conversations and the dialogue that's happening there. So at the end of this, what I've done here is I've given you all the 3 that you have to purchase. Now, Proofrock, it was just sold, so I know that's going to be changing soon, but right now, that's the Hope and the STIGs you can get at Proofrock. The Gates 2 is academic therapy, and then the CLED is the free one that you can get right there online. So I'll go ahead and stop share. We can go back in and take any questions you all have on the scales.
Okay, I'll start again.
Sure.
I'm so glad you are. So glad you are.
I guess I'm the talker today. So a question, you may have already made this clear and I just missed it. So I apologize if I'm asking something you already made clear. So do you utilize all of these scales? Like, I'm trying to think, are there certain scales that you do universal? You talked about that. And then are there some of them you just use with students that you all are watching? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Do you use all these scales with all students, and when a student comes through to the committee, have all of these scales been used on that particular student?
Typically, yes. The only one that we had not used, the Hope, yes, because that's that's a great overarching. I think it's a great starting one to utilize. The GATES again as well is another one because that's an academic skills. But when we had to fine tune, what we found is when we went, if we didn't have enough evidence from the GATES on the academic, even if they were highly probable, but we still needed something else. If something is missing, we want to make sure we're identifying a student gifted. So we're really diving deep. Then we would utilize the SIG. So the SIGs wasn't always used up until now. Because it's been a couple months for us using it here in Fayette County. So I can see, like, the CLED's not always used because it may be if someone's underachieving, and that wouldn't fall for that student. So I think if you're going to start the HOPE for sure, the GATES for sure, and then and then from there it would just depend on what avenue you're looking for students. But like I said, we have a collection of evidence form where we have, going back to that first section of our PowerPoints where you're looking at teacher recommendations, your portfolio of work, evidence collection, performance assessments, all your deep dive, your MAP, your Iowa, your COGAT, all the scores that you've gone into. And then this is the addition. This is the deeper dive into, it's like the partial composite scores that you're looking at. This is now looking at these characteristics of the student to see how that supports or does not support the scores that they have in their data trend.
Okay, so with the HOPE and GATES, so do you do those with all students at all grade levels? Or only the students who fall into this category?
Yes. So for us right now, the students that come through special considerations, this is who gets all these scales. The HOPE, though, we are actually utilizing the HOPE in 2 of our schools. We didn't get to get it done this year, but starting next year, in 2 of our lower performing schools as a screener. And because that's exactly what in the manual it talks about, using it with all students. And so we're going to focus in particular grade levels in grades 4 and 5 at 2 of our schools where the numbers really, we know there's gifted students. There's a low performing school. We have gifted students, but it's a very small percentage of gifted students, and we know there are more. So we're going to start with the HOPE as this universal scale for the entire grade level, and then from there see where our students come from that to help with referrals as well too.
Okay, that's great information. Thank you.
So we have a question in chat that asks about the what would be the best for identifying art and dance and drama. And then we also had a question about leadership and creativity.
Yep. So the GATES has the artistic. So it's in it. So you have that the GATES for both leadership and creativity, and then you have the dance and drama. So you have those for that. For dance and drama, we even go through our audition process, we talk a lot about raw talent and how much performance they've had experience of, because we know many students haven't had the opportunity. So we talk about that a lot with our process there. For leadership and creativity, the GATES has leadership and creativity. The SIG does not have artistic. I have to go back so you can see that. We can go back to the scale so you can see the front pages as well. Does that answer your question?
I think
Well,
so. Leslie,
so here's the situation about the dance part. We have a mother who has submitted videos of her daughter, and after looking at it and having 2 dance instructors look at it, it's just she's given opportunity and access, but she is a student who's been taking dance, not a student who's gifted in dance. And before telling her mother, who's so excited that this child isn't really gifted in dance, we're looking for a type of rating, because I know she's going to want to see, well, how are you coming to this non-identification? So we're treading very lightly right now.
Oh, so yeah, we have when we do our auditions, we have SCAPA in our district as well, which is our performing arts school. So if you ever are needing any rubrics, those are on SCAPA's website as well.
How do you spell that?
SCAPA, SCAPA. It's a school of creative and performing arts in Fayette County.
Okay.
So we mirror and we have to, because again, our district is so large, we mirror their processes. So I would encourage you to have some type of rubric that you had
Yes.
a point value of that. That will be helpful on that. And again, I think a lot of times to soften the blow too, she could continue to audition next year and continue to audition
Yes.
in the future. At this point, she's not identified gifted, but we'll continue to watch and monitor her as she progresses. Because we have, sitting here in Fayette County, we have our audition processes, and not everyone gets in. And some parents that have the opportunity of being in dance classes since they were 3 are not there. They are above average dancer, but they're not a gifted dancer. So, and I would encourage making sure that you have professionals and your judging panel, not just educators that may not have that experience.
Yes, that's what we're going for. Thank you.
Any other questions on the scales?
I just have a quick comment. I love everything you've been saying, Julie. I mean, you're underscoring something that we struggle with in special education. I think this is our special ed colleagues could really learn from this, but that idea of gathering as much data as possible, and it's not all normative data. It's qualitative. It's multiple perspectives, looking at the whole child, and it's just the things that you said have just been great. And it's great for people who are very linear in their thinking and very, okay, they've got to get this score, and if they don't get this score, then we move to the next step and so on, because the kids that we're talking about, twice exceptional, English learners, economically disadvantaged, I've always found in my experiences that it's not always a linear process with them. You have to really think outside the box. Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, I think when we were presenting this with teachers, I know when we first started, it was like, how much you're going to have to do. They saw at first it's so much work, but as they've come into this, they've become the advocates. It's been so impressive of doing that whole child approach and that whole child study of what, again, different perspectives, different scales, different data points, different pieces of evidences for identification to occur. And every student comes to the table with different experiences and exposure. And we've seen so much, even more so with with students being virtual for over a year, and how that impacted performance and experiences.
Just a quick plug for Fayette County and Bowling Green City Schools. I see Lisa Beth on here. Fayette County has, actually Bowling Green, I know they're cultural liaisons as well. If you have a very diverse school or district, finding that person who's bilingual, so they speak, the language of the students, and they also speak English very well, but they know the culture of the students. So I'm just thinking of those cultural liaisons in Fayette County and Bowling Green City Schools I'm sure are great. They're just a wealth of information to work with families and just increase that inclusivity factor that Julie has been describing.
Absolutely. Even our refugee populations, our migrant populations, we're a very, very, very diverse district, which is fantastic. And again, just trying to seek and find. We know they're out there, so we're just trying to find them.
I can say in Bowling Green, we've been able to, in the last, right before COVID, we were doing a better job with EL, but we are making a really huge leap this year. We're looking at local norms for EL, and the leadership interview is giving us some ideas into other, like maybe they're not in leadership, but it's giving us some better idea into where their areas are through that conversation for leadership.
Another scale we've started utilizing is that ROITS for leadership.
We use that as well.
Yeah, that's a good one too. I forgot about that. We're talking, Leslie, who you're asking about some leaderships, that the ROITS, I'll type it in the chat. Is a tool that we utilize when we're collecting evidences for our leadership students. there's a lot out there. It's just trying to figure out what works best for your district and for your students. And but you know, it's tweaking. it's tweaking, refining, reflecting, and doing it again. I'm sure next year there'll be something else that we add, take away. We're quite reflective. We want to be reflective, and just want to do what's best for our students.
We've had a note in the chat that says they appreciate the inclusivity, and you know, that is really what this is all about, finding more out about our kids so we really can provide the services that they need and provide access and opportunity. So the spirit, people appreciate your spirit, Julie and Skip, and they recognize that.
Thank you. Gifted doesn't always look one way. That's the hardest thing, I think, to sell. Educators mostly. I know we've had in our district, you know, just getting past those myths about gifted education.
Yes, there are a lot of myths for sure. So let me check in and see where do we want to go next? Do we want to Skip? Do you want to go on, or do we want to take our break now? Or let me check in with Julie and Skip.
Maybe a break, but I would,
Okay.
yeah, whatever.
Okay. You know, a break might be good. Sometimes a break in the morning, especially, is good when you've had some beverages, and it's good to get up and move just a little bit. So let's take a 10-minute break, and we'll be back. Let's see. It says 9:32. So let's just say, let's say we'll come back at 9:42. Thank you.
Thanks.
Julie, could I ask you a quick question, please? Oh, I'm on the website. Where would I find of your SCAPA? Where would I find some of those documents?
Are you if you're an FCPS, if you're on the Gifted and Talented page, go to the district gifted, go to district gifted and talented page.
Right.
And
let me do some more research. You can go take your break.
yeah, no, it's okay. You're good. You're good. No, I'm good. And then you're going to go to district programs, and there's going to be a page for like Gifted and Talent Accelerated Program, Liberal Arts Academy, MS Math and Science Technology Center, and then SCAPA. And you can click on SCAPA, and it'll take you right to the SCAPA website. SCAPA Bluegrass is our grades 4 to 8, and then SCAPA Lafayette is 9 to 12.
Leslie, let us know if you don't find that. We'll keep.
Yeah, I can share it. I can give it here too.
Okay. Sounds like that's going to be a very useful tool to Leslie very quickly.
Yes, 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 yes.
Just in time.
Well, we've been kind of holding her off for a while, and I mean, it was blatant with like lack of line and poise, but you know, she sees her little third grader, and
I understand. No, you get unhappy parents.
Right. I am in oh, I guess I had the high school by accident. So I need to be in district home first.
Yeah, here, let me get into this real quick here.
All right, I'm in district home.
Okay.
And then go to
they go to gifts, go to programs. Here, I can. I share my screen. I don't know if I shared it or not. Here, let me share real quick.
oh, here, let me get back to you then.
I should, so y'all know where it's at. They've changed their website just recently. We had another set that had programs right here. So that's
Okay, good, because I'm like, I don't see programs.
Okay. There used to be a second level that had programs. Okay, so let's go to departments and offices, and then go to Gifted and Talented.
There we are. Okay.
And so we have district gifted. So here you see SCAPA.
Gotcha. Okay.
And there's two. So this is where, and then they have family. I think it's under families. Let's see here. No, here under auditions. Here it is. So audition requirements, how they're scored. And she typically has rubrics. Oh, it's not there. Oh, here they are, down here. Okay, so where it says how our auditions scored,
Mm-hmm.
these are all the scoring guides.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I was listening in on that as well because I can really utilize that in my district too, and was not able to find it at first. So thank you for walking us through that.
There's a link too to SCAPAS. And like I said, we in Fayette County, we tried to do we have to have mirrored approaches, again, because with identification, SCAP is a service option. We have gifted and talented programs in our district. And that's, it's a special school, that's what that is. So going through the process, but we make sure, and then we do auditions district-wide as well. Again, to encourage opportunity and access for gifted students in the arts that would not have applied for SCAPA, and so, it's a barrier for some families. We recognize that. So we want to be inclusive in that. So students can get services at their school level as well.
Well, I would love to know how people are providing services for dance. We have a local theater, so our drama students, that's wonderful for them.
Mhm.
And we're trying to start a show choir, but for dance, we're such a small community. I don't know how to even.
Yeah, this is our second year. I have a teacher who has arts background. She's one of my resource teachers previously, who has an arts background, dance specifically. And so she, this past school year, became like a VPA specialist for me. And it's a K to 12. It's a huge job. She's done a lot virtually, because we were virtual. She had her own website, obviously, and had Canvas courses and Google Classrooms. And she had a lot of opportunities with dance that way. She used to go to the schools, performances and things, but it was more virtual. And she also had opportunities even with, like she had a big picnic in the park type thing where she would have professionals for the community be virtual with art, with dance, and with music. And so it was more of a collaborative approach as well. But she's done a phenomenal job. Lauren Case is her name, and I helped assisted her. It was her presentation at, oh, I have it right here. What was that? The Kentucky Music Educators Association, KMEA. They had a conference, I think it was back in February, and we presented on how to implement gifted services in the arts.
So does your district provide a stipend for her? Because we have a third grade teacher who has her own dance studio, and I mean, she's phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
And she's teaching all day, every day.
See, what you'd have to, but for service options, it has to happen during the school day for gifted. And when we first started doing this, I had what I did at one of my schools, I had like a teacher like that. She was like a second grade teacher that taught dance. So my resource teacher would support her classroom while she would take the kids out, if it was once a week or once every other week, and work with the students on their dance. So I think it's just trying to be creative.
Mm-hmm.
It may be something, we're going to talk about ESSER funds later. It might be something you might be able to utilize with some of the ESSER funds that you're getting, to at least get processes in place and opportunities in place, even with auditions and things to do that. Yes, you said you have, funds to hire a sub. That's where you can check in with your ESSER funds, because for the next 2 years you have that money. Maybe we didn't get incredibly a lot of money, but maybe in your district might be different.
Julie,
Oh.
this is Julia Roberts. And
Hi.
hi. one of the things that I'm thinking about as you shared information about instruments that have a cost to them, ESSER funds can be used for that because those are one-time
Yeah.
um, costs. And this is a huge opportunity for folks to get what they need at this particular time.
Absolutely. And sharing it, this is for inclusive, inclusive education. For your finding and seeking your underserved will probably be very well received.
Should be.
Well, it should, you're right, should be. Yes, Janet, I know. Yeah, Lauren is wonderful. And Austin, I know of him. I know he is a teacher at Brenda Cowan Elementary School. That's wonderful.
Okay, it looks like it's time for us to start back. I'm not sure we got that, but we had lots of engaging conversations. Looks like there's quite a bit of information in the chat about the arts. So you might want to review that information. So let's see, Skip and Julie, how do we want to proceed?
I'm happy to jump in, or
Yep.
if Julie, if you want to do any wrap up, okay.
Yeah,
If
no,
I can
good.
share my screen, I'm not sure if I can. Let me try. Yeah, here we go. All right. So I do want to underscore once again, I am certainly not an expert on sort of the intersection of GT and gifted, and I've learned a great deal. Learned a great deal from Julie, and I've also learned a lot just kind of preparing for this. So this isn't the greatest PowerPoint in the world. It's meant to really keep me on track as much as anything. So um, if anything sparks an idea or that you want to ask more questions about or whatever, please just contact me. You can contact me at my GREC address, or you can just give me a call. And I do work with a lot of districts, not just within the GREC region. I work with a lot of school psychologists in particular, but it's more on the special ed end. And so that's, I'm really so glad to have the opportunity to talk with you guys this morning. All right, let me see if there we go. So we'll just kind of breeze through some of these. Just, what is an English learner? Kind of, we don't have to go through all of this slide because it's a lot, but essentially it's about 1 in 10 right now of the United States population in public schools is an English learner, which is pretty high. Most of them are citizens. I think that's interesting to some people. They think that they're all from another country. They're not. Most are born here. And it's also interesting, when I entered the field, it was very difficult for me to really get the attention of national experts to come do training, because we really weren't, um, a state that had a lot of English learners. But now we're one of the top 5 states, according to the Pew Research folks, for growth in English learners. Typically, they attend urban school districts. That's sort of a national idea. But in Kentucky, what I find is I work with a lot of smaller districts. And in fact, the most diverse district in the state of Kentucky is Mayfield Independent Schools. I don't know if anybody is here from Mayfield. Whoop, I'm going the wrong way. Here we go. So as I said, 1 in 10. I took a look at the most recent school report card information, and so about 5% of the total student population in Kentucky were identified as English learners. Just under 15% of the total student population were identified as GT, about 96,550. So of the GT population in Kentucky, 1,100 or so were identified as English learners, and that's about 1%. So that's a 4% gap based on that 18-19 data. I took a look at Fayette County schools just because this sort of underscores the challenges that Julie and her team have faced, but also when she mentions all the work that they're doing to beef up the numbers of culturally and linguistically, economically diverse students, it really underscores the importance of all that. So based on the 18-19 school report card, they had 41,250 students in all. This is very impressive. 21.2% of the student population were identified as GT, and 14% of the population was identified as English learner. Of the GT population, they had 257 English learners, so about 3%. So there's, roughly an 11% gap there. So, but they are certainly doing exemplary work to close that gap. I'm very impressed. So I keep going the wrong direction. I apologize. So what's going on? And I think these are, as I said, this isn't really an informational PowerPoint as much as it is kind of a conversational PowerPoint to kind of keep me on track. But I think we can agree that, if we have 5% of our total student population in the state identified as English learners, we should expect to see that same level of representation in programs for gifted and talented. So what's happening? And I think perception is really, really key. And just some ideas about perception. Perceptions are always culturally based. There is no way for us to get away from our cultural frame. And they're often situated with regard to English learners in kind of a lack of understanding, certainly a lack of training, because that's our training institutions, as great as they are, they're really not doing a lot with English learners in terms of preparing teachers to enter the workforce. Often, too, I find in my work is that there's a deficit versus an asset-based way of thinking about students who don't speak English well. All right, I will get this, I promise. So to counteract that kind of bias that's inherent in perception, screenings are very important. And as I've learned over the last 3 or 4 weeks, screenings are really recommended in the literature for identifying gifted and talented, but they'll also miss English learners, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. So from my perspective, at the end of the day, the greatest foe of biased perception is to really get to know your kids and be in relationship with them. I just can't underscore that. I was thinking about leadership earlier when you guys were talking about it, and that's a huge category for English learners, and I'm going to talk about it in just a moment. But really knowing how English learners are kind of playing out their leadership abilities, it may not be apparent unless you really get to know them and know what their lives are like when they're not in the school building. That's where the rubber hits the road for leadership for a lot of immigrant and refugee students. So I'm just wondering, and you can put it in the chat, we don't really have to go into it, but I know some of this sounds familiar to you. I've been just in the little that I've been around experts in GT. Julie is one of my colleagues on the Pritchard Committee. I think it's one of the things that I hear a lot is, oh, gifted kids are okay. We don't have to worry about them. They're going to be fine in the pandemic, or they're going to be fine in general. So these are perceptions that are counterproductive, and they lead to these huge gaps and underservice for GT, and just in core instruction. But certainly for English learners being identified, these kinds of perceptions are counterproductive. For English learners, the most counterproductive and misguided perception that I see every day when I'm working with districts is this idea that they're lacking in something. They don't have communication skills. They lack educational experiences. Oh, they're not really in with they're still not part of our culture here in Bowling Green or Lexington or whatever. And that's seen as a disadvantage. And that's troubling to me. But so a lot of what I do is PR work. I try to just change opinions in people and get them to see all the assets that English learners bring to districts. One term that you're going to see a lot more of is multilingualism, and WIDA, which is the national consortium of states. It's about 39 states, I believe, right now. Kentucky's a member of WIDA. They have changed their term from English learner to multilingual, and it's been interesting to watch the federal, from the special ed perspective, you see changes in categories names over the years to be more politically correct or whatever. At the federal level, limited English proficient was just changed by ESSA. So it's a relatively recent change, but that idea that you're limited in your English proficiency, and that's seen as a disadvantage, and it is a disadvantage. I'm not saying that, but we're still talking about a human brain that with tremendous capacity to communicate in 2 or more languages, and that's where the multilingual term has kind of come from, and it's a really important development, I think, and it can foster a more asset-based view of English learners. And again, just contact me if you want to know more. I do a lot of training just for English learner core instruction, and I don't have time to go into much of that today. So what I advocate with districts is that they change. They really shift from that deficit-based thinking to an asset-based way of thinking. That these kids are coming to you with very rich life experiences. They come with immigration stories. They come with rich cultural backgrounds. They're multilingual, so it's really amazing when you think about them and all of the capabilities that they have, and how that can enrich a school and a district if it's played out well. So kind of on to the considerations for identification.
So Skip, just so you know, in the chat, you're getting some people praising the notion of multilingual and how that they're already making that shift in their district.
Perfect. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. And share any ideas in chat. I've kind of turned off the participant stuff, so I can't really see it, but
so you're getting some thumbs up. I wanted you to know that.
Oh, good, good. Well, share things in chat, because we will save the chat. And I'm just thinking here, we have the Kentucky Coalition for English Learners is having its Summer Institute starting a week from Monday. And I'm just thinking I missed the boat this year. I should have put in some workshops around identifying English learners for gifted and talented programs. And we'll do that. We'll have a fall institute or a winter institute. And Julie, I'm going to be chasing you down to help me with that. So, all right. So first of all, just kind of general considerations. That GT selection and placement committee, Julie already said this, and I just want to underscore it. If you have a diverse population, you need people on that team that really know about English learner programs, what constitutes a great program, what strong core instruction for English learners looks like. It's different than what some might think. And then language acquisition theory, what's going on, when someone is acquiring an additional language. And then that concept of multilingualism as well. Another general consideration are these standardized assessments. And again, you guys have been kind of hitting on that a lot this morning, which is great. Most I'll say many. I tend to go with most, but many standardized assessments, norm referenced in particular, are not appropriate for English learners. They have too much of a language load. They have inappropriate norms. There's a lot of cultural bias in U.S. testing, and I'm going to get into that more. But what we tend to do, really good school psychologists who know how to work around this sort of thing, they're involving interpreters. They are doing a more qualitative versus a quantitative assessment. But once you've done that, you have really changed the standardized characteristics of the test. So it's no longer a standard test, and you've altered your ability to use the norms as well. So there are a lot of ethical considerations for using standardized norm reference tests off the shelf with an English learner. Special considerations, again, as I said earlier, this presentation would be so helpful just for school psychologists, because I think that and I am a school psychologist, so I know where they come from. I know where I was when I first got into the field. They're very linear, and they sort of approach things in a real protocol-driven way, and they look at scores and score cutoffs and so on. So for GT to have this special considerations built in is amazing. And I really do think it's key to increasing English learner numbers in the GT programs. But one thing I was just astonished by is that the drop-down menu doesn't have English learner in it. And it's, I tend to see bias in everything, my own bias. Always start with me because I tend to be biased and so on. But to assume that, because they're disadvantaged, I can probably, include English learners in this or something like that, or underachieving. These concepts of lacking something really kind of play into that whole thing. So, if you guys have inroads with KDE, please work to have that changed, because that's really conveying a very biased perception. So I'm just going to go through quickly each of these categories and just give my thoughts, and then at the end, we can just sort of talk some more. In terms of general intellectual ability, of course, it's, as you guys have already pointed out, it's a little daunting to say that, it's a requirement to have a full-scale test, verbal and nonverbal. And if you do that, you're really going to preclude the ability, and if you do that in isolation, and that's what Julie's been talking about, is not do that in isolation. It's going to preclude the ability to identify many English learners. You're going to have special considerations. So, as I said, intelligence tests are in many cases inappropriate for culturally and linguistically diverse kids. And just threw in some reasons. We're not going. This is another training. It comes from a school psychology training, to be honest. But the technical adequacy, anytime that you have a test that's linguistically too hard for somebody, you've ceased measuring what you hope to measure, and you're really measuring language at that point. So the construct validity comes into question. There's also a large error term. We always have error in testing. It's impossible not to. We're trying to measure ability, and then we include the error, and then the norms and the norm tables will incorporate some range to accommodate that error. But when you're working with an English learner, the error term just starts to grow. And if you include an interpreter, then, whatever Mr. Wexler or Kaufman intended for that particular item ceases to become kind of, it's been interpreted into another language. And so you start to get big error terms. Also, good school psychologists will always extend time limits. They will always include an interpreter if they can. They retest often. And, one great technique for testing English learners in intelligence is you'll ask a series of questions in English, then you'll come back and you'll go through the questions again in the native language and see, because guys, it's one brain, and I think that's one of the biases of the testing industry, is that these kids have two language centers in their little minds. They have a Spanish or an Arabic or Somali language center with knowledge that goes in that, and then they have an English language center, and it's all one brain. And I have seen kids do phenomenal work in two languages. I'll just tell a quick story. I was at an international high school in the Bronx, and we were designing the international high school for Warren County schools, and so we were up there kind of watching and seeing how they develop things. And I was observing a physics class, and they had them broken up into small groups, which is great core instruction. They were in heterogeneous groups, which is great core instruction. So you had kids in each group who spoke maybe, well, maybe in the whole group there might be 4 languages. And in the whole group you had kids with very strong English skills, some with none. Well, there was a kid who had just arrived. He was a brand new arrival to New York City, and they were in a timed physics challenge. And they had the problem presented, and the group had a certain amount of time, and whoever won. Whoever got to the finish line first won. And this guy, who had just gotten off the plane a few days earlier, was the only one in the group who was able to solve the problem immediately. And through gestures, asking another kid who spoke Mandarin to come over and translate for this guy, interpret what he was saying, and just lots of wrestling among with limited English, they won. And it was this guy who whose brilliance they were able to unlock and use to win the challenge. We can't go into this a lot, but there's a lot of cases out there, big ones. Larry P. versus Riles resulted in IQ tests being banned in California. So, you know, there's a lot of work out there in the field around this biased nature against culturally and linguistically diverse kids when you're using intelligence tests. So what can you use? You know, what Julie gave you all sorts of great scales, and you know, what's good evidence for intellectual ability? And she already mentioned the first one, which is if you see a kid whose growth trajectory in English is tremendously steep and they exit the program in 1 to 2 years, and I've seen many kids do that, that's a very good indication that they're intellectually gifted. The second one, really, this would be key to have someone who knows about second language acquisition, who knows, you know, what's going on neurologically for someone who doesn't speak the language of the classroom, but they're in the classroom. Would be this sustained attention. Their language processors are just running, you know, full steam all the time. And they're processing a lot more information than their native speaking peers as a teacher is giving it, you know, as they're lecturing or whatever. So they're processing more information. They're also performing internal translation while they're processing the information. So if they're able to sustain attention and get work done, that's indication of a very powerful mind at work. So again, I think, again, teachers need to be in relationship with their kids. They need to be always observing, and they also need to open their minds. It's that training element that Julie mentioned, that they need. This is how they become more aware of ways that English learners might be gifted. And then just a final note about nonverbal tests. They're used quite a bit. I know school psychologists who really rely on them, but there's a lot of concerns still with the norms of the test, the integrity of the score when you breach the standard procedures, when you bring in an interpreter. So the cultural loading of the test, you know, as I've gotten to know kids over the years and I talk to them about testing, a lot of them will just say, why would you ask me something that you know the answer to, but I don't? Why would you do that? And that's a cultural thing. You know, that's something we do in the West, and particularly in the United States, that other cultures don't really do. They think, why would you ask a question unless nobody knows the answer to it and you want to know the answer? So, and then also many thought leaders in the field of school psychology and testing believe that nonverbal reasoning, it's definitely a part of overall intellectual functioning, but it's not the whole picture. So just some concerns there. Specific academic aptitude, you know, this is an area where you really don't have to worry as much about translation. If it's a good assessment and you're doing good accommodations, you really can get some very good data out of this. But annual assessments tend to be more problematic. And that's because I see this all the time. Districts don't do the right accommodations. So the teams will get sort of behind on where the kid is in their language proficiency, and they don't use proper accommodations. So the big annual tests can be concerning. The benchmarks and the formative assessments are very informative. Just to kind of show you, kids, English learners don't do well on academic testing, and that can kind of play into perception, I think, that how could they be gifted if they're, if they scored blah, 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 on the K-Prep. So here's where, again, 18-19 data. I can't wait till we can get some more data in there. But English learners were overwhelmingly more in the novice category in the elementary level. And then conversely, English learners in terms of proficient distinguished were half the number of non-English learners. So that was reading, this is math. The numbers are very similar. And then NAEP testing, there probably is more current data, and I just haven't gotten it. But I used this in a presentation with the Lexington area school psychologists a while back. And so fourth grade reading, below basic proficiency for the NAEP for English learners, and it had dropped significantly from 2015. So it's 2017 to 2015. So it was going in the wrong direction. Same thing for math. So why all these gaps? Technical quality and the appropriateness of the test is certainly something. Again, these are the annual assessments. These are the big ones. So if you're not accommodating properly, and you're not getting good data. The other issue is quality of core instruction, and that is a huge issue in the state of Kentucky and in every state. I mean, it's teachers knowing how to effectively instruct and support English learners is a challenge nationally. So regarding technical quality, I love this guy, and so I'm always about his research. It's Jamal Abedi at UCLA, and he's real. If you Google him, and I'll send my slides to Jamie, and she can send them out. Abedi's work is exemplary, and he's really gone after these. He's gone after intelligence tests, and he's also gone after achievement tests. And what he finds for achievement testing, for the big annual, the summative assessments, the big ones, that the directions, the items, and response options are really so, linguistically sophisticated that it's real, and it's done so that it's really not related to the construct or content being measured. And so they become these walls of language that English learners can't get over. And well, not just English learners, you guys, a lot of kids, because a lot of kids don't have that kind of academic language. And what tends to happen is they'll read a math item and they really won't know where to begin. They'll just get the calculator and start calculating. And they don't, the sophistication of the verbs and so on it's very difficult for them to identify what to do. Regarding core instruction, just back to what Julie said earlier, training. Teacher prep programs are not doing the work that they need to be doing. I've recently gotten more involved with teacher ed at WKU, and we did a book study last summer, and basically their comments at the end were, we're not preparing kids to teach this way. So there's a lot of work to be done in teacher prep. And so what's happening is that teachers are coming out and they're really not aware of instructional strategies, appropriate support and scaffolding techniques. And I think it feeds into this idea that in a lot of districts that EL teachers know the language side. They take care of that. Content teachers do content. And that's not accurate or appropriate. And in fact, it's kind of backwards based on current research. And again, just contact me if you want to know more about that, because that's can be new to a lot of people. So given the issues with assessments and English learners, it's best to rely on benchmark assessments, as I said, formative assessments to probe academic skills, use local norms, and Julie's presentation was so powerful. Just collect additional evidence in the form of student products, close and careful observations of academic problem solving and performances, that student performance side of it. Really observe how they're doing things, and they could be doing it in very creative ways. It's really interesting. Just again, as an aside, a quick story. Geo International High School in Warren County, just observing very sophisticated math approaches from the kids who were from Middle Eastern countries. They had a very different way of approaching math, and it was very interesting, very innovative, and kind of exciting to watch. The native language. Now, a lot of districts don't have. Bowling Green's working hard to build theirs and are doing great work. Fayette County as well, Warren County, Jefferson, and other districts are working at it. But it's just really critical to have a great infrastructure for interpretation and translation, because the native language can be key to really understanding giftedness for these kids. So, have them describe, either orally or written, or through writing, have them describe what they did in a particular problem-solving process, explain their thinking, explain their logic, and then have an interpreter say, here's what they said, or interpret their writing sample and say, yeah, this is how they're approaching it. And that's really key, because again, you've got one brain and you've got knowledge, these assets of knowledge and experiences that can be expressed in either language, both languages, along with gestures, facial expressions, and so on. We talked about Spanish translations, and this is a big one again with school psychologists. They love to go buy these, but they're not great. They're generally, particularly the Wechsler, I don't know if I'm sorry, Woodcock, not Wechsler, but Richard Woodcock has devised so many achievement batteries, and his wife is from Mexico, very highly educated, obviously. And so it's very sophisticated Mexican Spanish, but Guatemalan Spanish, Cuban Spanish, all these dialectical differences are significant. And also, you guys know this, I know, but let's just always be reminded that kids from Latin American countries may speak any number of hundreds of indigenous languages there, and not Spanish. So always be kind of aware of that, because each country has dozens of indigenous languages. A strong, and as I'll just underscore it again, the strong interpreter and translation infrastructure is really important if you have a diverse district. And those individuals have to be trained. So supplemental scales, like all of those mentioned by Julia, are helpful to provide a more comprehensive whole child perspective. And I thought the CLED was a revelation for me. It's really, really great to kind of look at those. And I think, as Julie mentioned last week in a meeting that we had, it comes with the research base as well. So really powerful. You guys okay? Any questions or anything so far? Okay, I'll keep moving. I love leadership. I love this. I love that we go and we look for kids who are great leaders, because within English learners, oh my gosh. And I think it tends to come from that immigrant and refugee experience, if they're relatively new to the country. As I said, most are not. Most were born in the United States. But even those born in the United States, if you do not speak the dominant language of a community, or you're not, completely assimilated into the dominant culture of the community, it's a family that's experiencing some dissonance, in some way. And their access to services can really be impacted. Access to health services, access to transportation, access to all the things that they need. And that's when children step into leadership roles. And it's really unbelievable. And you, again, as teachers kind of get to know their kids, find out about them, become in, community with them and in relationship with them, they'll hear about these things. What'd you do this weekend? Well, Mom had to go to the clinic, and I went and I interpreted. There was a lot of paperwork to fill out. I did it for her. So we see that all the time. That's just part of that immigrant refugee experience. And if you think about it from your own life, most of us, all of us probably on this call, we're children of immigrants. And so that's what our initial generations did. They helped each other. And so these kids step into these roles, and this is the way to make up all these huge gaps that we see. I've also witnessed a lot of students that are willing to assist other families So I can think of one Burmese young lady at Warren Central High School she was the go-to person in her Burmese community. And she was 17 years old, and oh my God, you would see her at the Social Security office on the weekend. Yeah, she did everything. She was amazing. And then you'll also see English learners that are willing to assist other English learners in class, and they go the extra mile. And I'm so glad that leadership is a way that these kids can maybe access gifted and talented programs. Creativity and the arts. These are areas with so much potential to identify many, many English learners and start to make up the gaps. So as far as collecting evidence, can't say enough about parents and family members. You have to get their opinions. They will, they can nominate their kids, they can give their opinions, they can give you background and reflection, they can talk about their culture. I could go on and on here. It's just, you cannot do this without their support and without their input. They're critical. Multiple perspectives and I think that was one of the big takeaways for me from Julie's talk this morning, is that multiple perspective approach. And it's really tantamount to identification. And it's also fundamentally important, and it's the law, to provide language support for the students and their families. You need, when you're explaining the program, access to the program, because culturally, identifying gifted and talented students and providing extended services for them is not something that's done in every country. And so a lot of parents will not understand that and will need to be told about it. Involve your teachers who are in the English Learner program when crafting the service plan. This is under the programming side. It really depends, and I'm kind of coming at that from the special ed side. So when we're designing individual education plans in special ed, we always include English Learner program staff, because there's that program service plan for English Learner programming, and it's got to line up with the IEP. Knowing the English learner's current language proficiency is really kind of the key to that. If they're very proficient in English, then when they're identified for gifted, then you may not even involve the staff from English Learner programs much, because they tend to back off for a kid who's very proficient. And of course the kid can exit after a period of time. But it's really the kids who have who are still gaining proficiency in English, and maybe speaking is still a little bit behind writing, and they're just in that sort of emerging English proficiency stage. That's where there's going to be a lot more coordination between the two staffs, the gifted and talented staff and the English Learner program staff. So just some parting thoughts from me. Training is key. So, training teachers to kind of, I would argue that we go to culturally proficient teaching for kind of general education, and we start there, because recognizing manifestations of giftedness in English learners means really kind of going after your own perceptions of what is gifted. What does that mean? Because your cultural lens impacts how you see giftedness, and your school culture affects that as well. So kind of looking, because English learners are going to be outside that box many times, and their giftedness is going to be displayed in ways that you've maybe not had, any experience in. The second one is effective instructional practices and supports, because I see still, and I'm glad, because it's job security, but I still see a lot of schools and classrooms that don't have effective core instruction for English learners. So what happens if you don't have strong pedagogy and supports kind of in combination, and high expectations for English learners, that's key. If those things aren't in place, then access points really aren't open to some kids. And if the access points aren't open, they're just going to sit there, and they're not going to show you what they can do. When you start to open up access points, you start to provide support, then you're going to start to see some real talent emerge from English learners. And back to the thing with parents, just please get input from them. Their perspectives are really critical, and that's going to require strong interpretation, translation. It's also, as I said, Fayette and Bowling Green, Jefferson are kind of ahead of the curve in terms of providing cultural liaisons in the district who are go-tos for understanding culture. I can think of Basel in Fayette County. Man, that guy is amazing, and he knows the families, he knows their cultures, and he communicates well with them. And he would be a wealth of information if I was considering gifted and talented classification for an English learner. So I'm a student in this area. I would say that again. But any questions or comments or anything like that? And I will stop sharing. I want to look at. Okay.
So maybe this is an opportunity to, I know you've been getting a lot of thumbs up in the chat again, Skip, with your comments, but maybe it's an opportunity for you to reflect about this and ask some questions just about this section.
I just want to say thank you for bringing to light the leadership in what multicultural or multilingual students do outside of school to just support those in their community and in their home.
Mm-hmm. So I might have missed part of your thing. So was that a question or just?
No, I was just saying thank you.
Yeah, it's
great insight.
Yeah, it's really amazing when you hear what some of these kids do. And again, when you're in the doctor's office or Social Security office or any of these places, Medicaid, and you see these kids bringing in their parents and navigating these really complex systems that, you know, I have a brother with Down syndrome and I have to do his Medicaid recertification every year, and it's super complex and I struggle with it. But these kids are there, and it's really amazing.
And I think that's evidence, you know, I think what you're talking about is, and both Skip and Julie have talked about, us gathering just more and more evidence about our students. And the more we know about them, the more we can provide service, and the more we can really make a community, you know, set up a community environment where that the notion of challenge is, you know, is there. Because what I heard you saying too, when you were talking about visiting the school in the Bronx and things, is that it reminds us that, and we've all, and I've heard Julia talk about this for years, is that, you know, reminds us we all love to be challenged, whether or not you have that label. We love to think, we love to be presented with something we find challenging and have thoughts about it and come together and collaborate. That's kind of the nature of being mammals, I think. I think avid animals do that. But anyway, we were reminded of that because it's so easy to get in these little boxes, and like you have all these if-thens. Well, if this, then we fall this score out, and then this score falls out, and it all becomes just like a little if-then table. But this is much bigger than an if-then table. It's really about understanding the human spirit, and I think that's what you've both talked about today, and about being asset-based.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I see people commenting in the chat about the community element, and again, the asset of the community. Skip told his story, and I was reminded before COVID, I was helping in the office of a church because the church was giving plots of land to have gardens on. And there were lots of families there that were English learners, and their children would, you know, communicate to them about, you know, the square footage of the plot, you know, the cost of the plot, you know, what the expectations were for water, you know, where you gathered water, all those things, you know, it was amazing for me to watch about how that just occurred naturally, you're right. And certain of the older kids, probably middle school, high school kids, would have small groups, and then how when they communicated, how then everything was just settled. I mean, it was just like it felt chaotic for a while, but because there was a lot of energy in the room, because because I wasn't communicating well with them about the plots. Was trying, but I was not. But then once all that communication happened, and happened from those leaders of the kids, it all settled out. People paid their money in cash for their plot because they were renting that plot because it was going to be used to bring someone in to till the ground and do some work. The money was going back into the plot. But anyway, it was just amazing when you said that about the community and the leadership of those kids. It happened because of those kids, not because of me. In fact, I did all the things that were wrong.
I'm reading through the chat, finally kind of catching up a little bit. And kudos to you, Elizabeth, for changing to multilingual in Bowling Green City Schools. Just change it. I love that. So I would encourage you to do that because, as she says in her comment, there was an overwhelming response from principals. There's overwhelming response from teachers. So, it just acknowledges, again, that beautiful brain that can express all that it knows in a couple. We're all English speakers here, I think, primarily, but having 2 or more languages to talk about the world and your life and all that, and how you would approach a problem. What a great asset. There's also a lot of, I think it's in the slides, but I didn't mention it too much, is that the research on intellectual functioning and bilingualism or multilingualism, there's a lot of research out there. It really changes the structure of the brain, and more parts of the brain begin to kind of engage in problem solving when you're bilingual or multilingual.
So Skip, there's a question in that, or maybe it's not a question, but there's something for you to respond to on the chat. It's the very last item. It's about a 5th grade student.
I think so. I'm reading it. Yeah. I think it's something to investigate, and that's where you bring them in. You look at I'll use protocol just because I think it is important to always have a standard sort of protocol for your approach. We had, just again, a story in Warren County when I was there as the director. We had a team that looked at special ed referrals each month, and we would gather, and teachers would bring us. And what we found is that we had 2 school psychologists on staff who were amazing, and they had very different approaches to doing the work that they did. But I would point out to them that I was getting ready to retire, so I said, we're not going to accomplish this before I go, but if either of you, God forbid, a tree fell on you on the way to work, the amount of knowledge that you have is gone, and so your way of thinking, you guys need to design a protocol, because that's something you can give to other school psychologists, other districts. And so Julie basically described a protocol this morning. They bring them into this very standard process where kids are treated in very similar ways. And so I would definitely, a kid who's doing this, she says, when I asked him about his community leadership, he's like, nah, because they see it as their, in the United States, we're an individualistic society. We thrive on, I don't need your help, In other cultures, and most cultures in the world, it's much more of a community-based thing. So this little guy would probably say, I didn't do anything. It wasn't anything special. This is what I do for my family to assist them. So taking this case and bringing them into a protocol like Julie described, I would highly recommend, because again, everything's culturally, the idea of gifted and talented in the United States is a culturally a socially defined thing. And in Somalia, they might say, that was nothing. In the United States, a kid interpreting for his family, sitting there in a line, and I keep going back to Social Security and Medicaid because they're horrible to deal with. But to just sit patiently, wait your turn, navigate all this paperwork, navigate all these US systems. I think, again, I would take them through the protocol though. I would do the CLED, I would do HOPE, I would do those things and gather all that information and also look for manifestations in the school. Because if this kid has that sort of ability, it's playing out somewhere.
And I'll add too, I know even with our students that are, students that many of them have impact with the community part of that leadership, because our regulation, students are supposed to have participation in the class, school, and community. So we have those dialogues with those students of what would you do if, because you're talking about, if transportation is a barrier, what would you plan? What would you do? And those conversations, I know in many of our schools from our GT teachers, the students have found what they would do if they could. And so even with COVID, our students were home for a year. So, we didn't have those experiences like they did before. So having dialogue and again, that relationship piece like Skip reference is so incredibly important in identifying our students.
Yeah. And I would argue COVID has really brought out, we have a neighborhood here that serves pretty much all refugee students. That's where a lot of refugees move. And so they had 4 hot spots, woefully inadequate for all these families, but they had 4 hot spots. They all had all had Chromebooks. And so we had kids basically teaching other kids and their parents, because the parents are so key to this as well, how to use Google Classroom. And they were all sitting on the parking lot at Lee Point Apartments, and this 5th grader was walking around. Oh, here's how you set up your account. Here's how you do this. Here's how you do that. Now, if you ask her, she would say, I just did, it wasn't a big deal. But you bring her into this strong protocol like Fayette County has, and you're going to see multiple facets of leadership coming out of someone like that. Great comment, iPad. Yeah.
Yes, the notion of honoring a student, because of their work and their service, really, it's important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, Julie and Skip, where do we go next?
Well, I think next we're going to talk about ESSER.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Skip. Okay, I'll share my screen. Yeah.
Thank you, Skip. Thank you, Julie. It's been such an important conversation.
So we talk about ESSER funds. I know that all of our districts had received their funding recently, and we're just here in Fayette County just trying to decide upon ideas to utilize these. And Dr. Roberts talked about it just a few minutes ago. These scales would be a perfect opportunity. I referenced earlier the SIGs, the GATES, and the HOPE, because they are expensive. It's something that's you have to purchase to utilize. So that might be something that you could request when disbursement of those ESSER funds. Another thing that we talked about here in Fayette County, we have the Iowa and the COGAT here, and we utilize it district-wide in our students in grade 3, and obviously for students in grades 4 through 12 through the referral process, and being able to utilize that at multiple grade levels, to show instructional progress and instructional purposes. Beginning of the school year, giving our students these tests. Besides, we already utilized the map data, but the Iowa it's a great tool for instructional purposes for the key domains and skill sets. So that's one thing to consider because it is quite expensive. The online platform is incredibly so much more efficient for us in our district and just gives us so much better use of the data, honestly. But again, it does cost more when utilizing that online platform. We utilize here for supplementary gifted curriculum for our regulation, having a qualitatively different experiences. We utilize the Vanderbilt University curriculum a lot as supplementary. And of course, College of William and Mary always has great things for us to utilize. So I wanted to, let you know of those things that we have been purchasing over the years for our schools. We are very, try to be very, we are very consistent with that. We purchase the same curriculum for our schools for supplementary, and then obviously they use as needed. But we want opportunities at all schools, no matter where our students are enrolled. Another one that we've just started utilizing here in Fayette County, talking about drama, would be the Music Theater International out of New York City. The Broadway plays. They have junior plays. They are like 30 minutes long, and longer ones up to an hour. Both SCAPA, and then we've utilized it in our schools as well. This Music Theater International, again, you buy the rights. So again, it's expensive. This might be another use of your ESSER funds. And you get the play for the amount of time that you have requested it, and how many performances you're going to do. This is all based on that, and this calculation of prices. Another thing we were talking about earlier with judges, the cost of judges and professional judges for your visual performing arts auditions is incredibly important to validate your process, as well. And if parents file appeal or file a grievance, and the process itself, you have this in place, that you have professional judges on your committees. Another thing that we've focused on here in Fayette County is just technology, making sure that our teachers have the technology as well as our students. Our students all got the Chromebooks, but we had lots of outdated Chromebooks and laptops and things for our teachers. And now that we are all virtual, I'm just trying to, again, having this for our teachers as well as all of our students, to make sure they have that kind of information. So those are some things that I had, we just talked about, and what we've done here in Fayette County. And again, and I didn't put this on here, but definitely the scales would be a great opportunity for you to use with those ESSER funds.
I have a question. I'm curious, is anyone using any ESSER funding to provide direct service to students, like, are using, I know that it could, learning loss, you could have extra persons because of learning loss. Is anyone doing that, like providing teachers or providing services from other, outsourcing some gifted services, or using some really kind of creative methods to provide additional service? I'm just curious about that. Is anyone doing anything like that?
Our district is doing summer ignites at the schools, and then we have gifted our gifted program sites, like SCAPA, for example. I mean, I had Carla Pleasant here the other day, and we were talking about what she was doing. So they're paying stipends to the teachers for gifted services, to for music law, the gifted students that are identified in music, and they can come and do summer ignite for a 2-week actually there's 2-week camp like settings that we're doing, and we're also doing that at our gifted program sites as well.
So is that paying teachers you have on staff, or is it
Yeah.
a combination of musicians, or is it a combination?
No, it's from what I've been told, it's paying the gifted teachers on staff.
Okay.
A stipend.
Because having enough funds to pay for teacher services is really a problem when our gifted funding has been capped for the number of years that it has. I mean, whole generation of kids, So this is an opportunity to dip into those ESSER funds and provide services that we haven't had, an opportunity to do. So I wonder about that. If we could showcase some of those things, those ways to provide additional services.
Jamie, this is Julia, and I know of a superintendent who was sharing with me that she would be hiring someone at each middle school with a focus on gifted kids.
I think that's incredible.
I have a question about that. So like we're trying to hire teachers, but we're really not finding gifted certified teachers. So how is that middle school handling it? I mean, do we know what they're doing with certification?
Actually, I think I do. Of course, someone can have 2 years as emergency certification. And so finding people who want to do it but are not currently certified is the route that they're going.
We've tried that and we're getting people going, I don't want to go back to school. We can't find people willing to take those courses.
Well, Julie, you might share with them what Fayette County is doing.
Yeah, we are actually, it's not with ESSER funds, but we have created a cohort of 10 teachers. I mean, principals recommend, we're actually going through the process now. Principal had recommended teachers that they feel would be a good candidate for a GT cohort. And we've partnered with WKU, their gifted studies program, and we're going to do they're going to take their classes through WKU, but Fayette County is going to be paying for their classes. And they will only have to pay for their books. And we're doing the same thing with EL. Our director is over EL and GT. And so we're able to do both. So they're partnering, I think, with EKU for EL.
They are. Yeah.
And then we're partnering with WKU for GT. So we're very excited about it. So because we have the same situation, we interview candidates that are not GT certified, and not everyone wants to go back. So this really has enticed. I know a couple of ours that are coming in, they're brand new this year that we hired as resource teachers. And they're like, sign me up, this is great. So we're excited about it.
So Julie, being a cohort model, I'm making some assumptions about that, but that is that their work, their day job would be part of their coursework. I mean, they might do action research with that, and I mean, they would do extra duties or extra work with that, but it would be different than a traditional course. Is that right?
Yeah, they'll be taking classes with Dr. Roberts and the professors at WKU, and in the evening they'll be virtual. If you would take a class of your WKU gifted class of 3 classes and the practicum as well, and then take the praxis. So that's all going to be a virtual component, online classes, and they'll take the 3 classes, and then they'll be able to, again, and at the end, focus with their practicum with their school placement. And follow through with that.
That's a big trend in the state for EL. Yeah, Davis County, Jefferson County, Fayette are doing that. Warren pursued it and it didn't happen, but we were looking at Title II funds. I think Title II is a big one.
That's what we utilized here. That's what we utilized here, because I think in a lot of, thankfully, I mean, there's money there this year because there was so many opportunities that would have been used here in Fayette County for professional development and conferences and conventions. I think that people would have gone to, but with virtual this year, many people didn't travel. We were able to use, we use our Title II for CAGE. We send, typically 50 to 80 teachers to CAGE each year. We utilize our Title II funds to do a proposal and submit that to that director and offer opportunities that way to grow and to encourage teachers to utilize gifted strategies in the classroom.
And I dropped the May 3rd guidance document from KDE in the chat. It's great. I mean, it's pretty comprehensive, and it talks about, it's included ESSER 3 in their guidance. And page 15 is where the gifted and talented guidance starts.
So thank you, Skip, for doing that. It makes me think about being creative that way. I wonder if some of the ESSER funds, because it does provide professional development for teachers, if those courses would be considered a form of professional development. I don't know. I can't see why it would not, but I don't know that for certain, if that makes sense. But think about how you would use those funds then in a short amount of time, 2 to 3 years, and then you'd have people certified. That could really be beneficial for EL and GT. Be nice to have a combination there, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be great to have some folks that have interest in both? That would be a nice pilot. So let's think about this. Any other, this is your time to share with each other about, we have this opportunity now with ESSER funding. More, the ESSER 3 is, as Skip mentioned, they even have guidance on that now. And so what will we do? How will we, create a better system? Because we're talking about everything we've talked about today is creating a better system, the protocols, the policies, removing those much bias as possible. I think we always have bias, but acknowledging, realizing that bias and thinking about what we do differently and looking at life through a new lens. How do we use these funds to help us with that? Is something I think the network could really shine a light on. So one thing that we're going to do in a little bit is we're going to give you a survey, and it's going to ask you, really, what do you want from the network next year? What would be helpful? And so that would, Greg, and Western, of course, always want to serve the community in the best way. And you are the people in the field, I'm not there with you in your district when you're working through these challenges and opportunities. So we really do can't wait to see what you write in on this survey that we're going to send out. But Julie and Skip, other information or other ideas that we want to talk about?
I can't think of anything. I just think, again, ESSER funds were intended for this most vulnerable population, the ones who were most significantly impacted by COVID. And they are the underserved people that we're talking about today. So just, follow the guidance from KDE and look for creative ways. I would suggest that, ESSER 2 had some ways of spending that did not carry over to ESSER 3 and so on. So there are all those little corners that you can look for ways to be creative. And Julie and I both talked a lot about training and professional development, and ESSER could be a way to really start to hone in. It would be in line with the spirit of ESSER to hone in on these populations and identification for gifted and talented. So
I think advocating with your district for the underserved is incredibly important, and this is a perfect opportunity for that.
And one thing I think that you've done, and our audience has done today too, is you've shared stories about kids. You've shared stories, specifics, and that's really what communicates to our school boards and to our communities. When they can see these things happen to a person in their community is when they really start to realize it and overcome some of those bias that we have. So that's something that as a network, maybe we could do too, shine a light on some of these, successes. That would be great. So Julia, let me check in with you and see if you have anything you would like to share. She may have stepped out for a second. So let me check in with you, Kelly. Okay. Now, one thing that Kelly wants us to do for fun is that we want to tweet about our network meeting today. So what we're going to ask you to do, if it's okay, I want you to put your cameras on and tell us when you're ready. And we're going to do 2 different pictures because we're going to need to do 2 pictures so we can get everybody in the picture. Okay. So I'm going to ask you to put your camera on, put on your game face. Get your hair all fixed. Oh, I'm seeing those beautiful faces come on. Okay, do the smile. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Got 1 picture. Now I'm going to make a second one. We're so many people, we have to have 2 screens. Look at that. Beautiful. Thank you. Oh, sorry, Tammy didn't have a camera today. Well, Tammy, I'm so sorry. We got your name, I think, so you'll be involved that way. So I'm going to post our survey in the chat now. There we go. So you can click on the survey, go to this and fill it out for us, please. You will automatically receive your certificate for today. And we're going to stay on for a little bit for any specific questions that you have, but we thank you for being with us. As always, you are the best. You do everything every day for kids, and we appreciate you.